You're welcome. So let's just go through some of the criticisms and I'll give you some facts just to think about. First of all, just going on Sam's slide earlier when he sort of compared Malaysia to Singapore. I agree with Dr. Mazuki, you can't compare Malaysia and Singapore. Singapore, negeri sekangkang kera, you not compare dengan Malaysia. I used to study in Singapore. I can run from one end of Singapore to Kampung Singapore, Ang Mo Kio, Woodlands in one day. You try to do that, Dr. Pasir Mas, it'll take you a few days to run there. It's impossible to manage a small country like Singapore, to get investments into a small country, almost homogeneous. 80% of Singaporeans are of ethnic Chinese origin, without having to manage a hinterland, without having to manage rural development, without having to manage agriculture. Please, don't compare Malaysia to Singapore. That's my first slide. And his first slide, it takes it all the way up to 2009. It doesn't tell you 2010, actually, when we went up to number 10. So, I knew the slide wasn't complete. The second point about Philippines attracting more investments than Malaysia, fine. You know, last year, Philippines attracted more investments than Malaysia. So did Vietnam. They started at a lower base. When we were attracting a lot of investments, these countries weren't even open. Vietnam wasn't even open. Philippines wasn't even in the radar screen. Now there's a lot more things to invest in the Philippines and Vietnam. But is the Philippines a necessarily better place to live in than Malaysia? I'll just give you an example. The student-to-teacher ratio in the Philippines, on average, is 60 students for one teacher. You really want to go to the Philippines? I don't think so. I'll take Malaysia any day over the Philippines. Just because they managed to get more investments last year than Malaysia, it doesn't mean that they're a more competitive country. It just means that they have lower base to work with. There was GLC slide. I have to touch this because the Khairy professor has given me the last page so I can clean up a lot of mess along the way. No problem. Saudi post-Malaysia, post-Malaysia, you know, you simplify it and say, how can you lose money when all you do is deliver the post? Yeah, okay, if you want to talk to people who don't really read, you can just say post-Malaysia just delivers the post. But post-Malaysia actually invested in a company called Transmile, which is a Korean company, it's like FedEx. And because of problems within that company, there was a write-off, there was a big write-off which affected post-Malaysia. But operationally, they've never made a loss. It's always remained in the black. That's one. Second, this case of Telja. I love this case because it's just so simple. The opposition tells you, including Suara Keadilan, that wonderful newspaper, that Telja is bankrupt. Why? Because its cash reserves went down from 4 billion to 2 billion. Wonderful. Oh, hilang 2 billion. Selama kamu kata Telja hilang 2 billion Malaysia, ini rasuah Barisan Nasional. Nah, right. But he doesn't tell you that Telja's assets. When you have a company, anybody who has a company here, you know you have cash reserves and you have assets as well. Telja's assets over the same time. Its cash reserves, yes, did go down by 2 billion, but its assets went up by 6 billion ringgit. Mana jadi assets meningkat daripada from 9 billion to 15 billion ringgit from 2004 to 2009. Net asset position of 12 billion ringgit Malaysia. And that's not even market price. That's not even valuing the land it owns according to market price. That's not even valuing the shares it owns according to market price. It could be much, much more than that. So that's why, if people say, if you feel slandered, why don't you take action against people who do that? That's why the government is doing that today. Telja has taken Suara Keadilan and some of the Keadilan leaders to court because we believe that this is exactly the kind of thinking that we cannot tolerate and allow for continued dissemination of kind of students. Now, if you really talk about success stories, he said success stories just now, he asked Dr. Mazuki to be specific. Now, I just want to tell you something. Competitiveness is about good governance. It's about governing well. And I think the government's trying to do that. We're trying our best to govern well, we're trying our best to enhance measures to combat corruption. But the shoe fits on the other side of the leg as well. It doesn't just fit on one side of the leg, the shoe fits on the other side. Just now, Dr. Mazuki mentioned about corruption in state governments. We have to look at that seriously. If you look at the media today, every single day, they are talking about one issue and one issue only in Selangor. What's that? That's the issue of sand. And when you ask about the issue of sand, is politicized and all that, it's not politicized. The key thing here is good governance, whether or not you have a competent Menteri Besar. But then when you ask the Menteri Besar, there's illegal sand mining going on in your state. He says, I don't know that there's sand mining. The guy brings a helicopter to do sand mining, brings a reporter to, no, that's not in my state. It is in Selangor. It is happening. And if we don't have good governance, how can we have competitiveness? If you, for instance, I'll give you a fact, that in the year 2014, if the Selangor state government doesn't get off its backside and agrees with the federal government to build a water transfer, water processing plant in Ululangat, we will have to charter ration water by 2014. You think foreign investors are going to come? If they find out in Kuala Lumpur, in Klang Valley, we have to ration water by 2014 because of the incompetence of the Selangor state government today. I think so. And these are all factors of competitiveness. And I'm not being political here. I want to give you the facts and figures. These are things which are factual, and which are real. And the last point that I want to raise is something that Dr. Zudi raised now. Actually, two more points. Actually, one more point that Sam raised earlier, which is the independence of the judiciary. And this one you can just check on the response given by the opposition in terms of the independence of the judiciary. We all agree that the judiciary has to be independent if we were to have a competitive country. When a court decision goes the way they want it to go, they say, oh, the judiciary is independent. For instance, when Shanwa was released from prison, oh, the judiciary is really independent now. Or for instance, when the court case went against Barisan Nasional in the case of the Perak State Assembly, or the judiciary is really independent now. But when the appeals court overturned that, they say, oh, no, something wrong with the judiciary. You can't have it both ways. The judiciary is either independent or it isn't. You cannot say this one is independent, this one is independent, this one isn't. We are trying our best to ensure that there is minimal or if not nothing, no interference in the judiciary, and you cannot take what is good and say what is bad. It's the judiciary, and it's something that we are serious in overturning. Now, my last point is very simple. Dr. Zudi, his points are great. I absolutely agree with him. We need academic freedom. We need freedom of speech. These things are important to have a competitive country. And his main point, there was a big problem with his main point. He said, competitive countries have freedom of speech. Competitive countries allow their universities to speak freely, openly, the professors and students. I think I'll be thinking, because there's a big problem there. I looked at the IMD report, and the most competitive country in the world is Singapore. They really have freedom of speech in Singapore. I mean, if you go to Singapore universities, they're really free to speak out. Singapore professors are really free to do what they want. Singapore students are really free to say what they want. And Singapore newspapers are free to write what they want. They're not. So there's a problem there. If you look at the country that has received the most foreign direct investments in the last 5 years, if we measure it according to freedom of speech and freedom of conscience, it's, surprise, the People's Republic of China. And if you go to Beijing, I'm sure you'll enjoy all the freedom of speech. Go to Tiananmen Square, try to organize a demonstration there. Within 5 minutes, I think you'll be locked up or worse than that. So, I mean, when you throw these things out, it just doesn't match up with statistics, it just doesn't match up with facts. And I just want to conclude by saying, because that was my response, but my added point to all of this is that I think the government understands all these problems and is trying its best to ensure that we change and we reform the government so that we remain competitive. If you look at liberalizing services, the 10th Malaysia Plan has put in a lot of incentives to spur private investment. It's not that we don't have money. We are flush with liquidity, with savings in this country, savings rate of almost 35% of our GDP. Just to mobilize that savings rate is enough for us to spur investment opportunities and private investment. Education system has been touched on, talent cooperation, corporatizing minor, focusing on the bottom 40%, Dr. Zudi kata tadi, jurang pendapatan has widened. That's why we said bottom 40% we're going to help with 10th Malaysia Plan. So ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude this round by saying, when you want to say something, when you want to criticize, by all means do so. I come here and I am happy that my opposite number from Keadilan is here, because this is real freedom in a university in Malaysia. I'm going to say that together. But let the facts speak for themselves. And I think you can decide after that whether or not Malaysia is a better place than